Okay, so for my diagnoses, I had ADHD, so attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And just some characteristics of this are just inattention, daydreaming, they're impulsive, they have like some social issues, etc. So for my outside of the box, I kind of did the more stereotypical things. So a child that's not paying attention in class, he's being disruptive and kind of picking on another student there. And then he's acting out and just causing a lot of distractions in the classroom. And then for the inside of the box, there really is no like determined etiology of ADHD, but there are 5 different hypotheses. So one is physical, which is the diet and allergies and toxins, so just the things that the child consumes on a daily basis. And then there's behavioral, which is just the lack of parental boundaries, which is kind of just saying that the parent doesn't really discipline their child very well. And then emotional, so the child may have experienced trauma, depression, or anxiety throughout their lifetime. And then personality, so just a lot of people think it's just the temperament of the child that causes ADHD. And then social, so media, culture, school, electronics, so just the things that the child is exposed to, so just television, video games, etc.
And I had the pervasive developmental disorders. They're also known as autism spectrum disorders, and it's an umbrella term for autistic disorder, Asperger's disorder, childhood disintegrative disorder, Rett's disorder, and pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specific. PDDs consist of a broad class of conditions that reflect a range of deficits, of which autism is the most well documented. PDDs are characterized by severe and complex impairments in social interaction and communication skills, and by the presence of stereotypical behavior, interests, and activities. The unusual combination of sensory, communication, and behavioral characteristics seen by PDDs have significant negative effects on a child's ability to participate in home, school, and community activities, particularly associated with autism and severe limitations in relating to their peers and the displays of those ritualistic stereotypical behaviors. And for the inside of our box, it's currently thought that PDDs are a neurobiological disorder, although none of the mechanisms is definitely known. Many reliable studies suggest that the impairment occurs during the sculpting or wiring of the brain in utero. A typical developing child, the connections in the brain are shaped by experience and learning, but with PDDs, it appears that synaptic and dendritic growth occur without guidance in areas related to communication and interaction skills. Therefore, the correct migration and synaptic connections just are not made for these kids. The areas that are primarily affected in the brain include the amygdala, which is responsible for emotional responses, including aggressive behavior that is often seen in some of these individuals. The cerebellum, and it regulates our balance and our motor activity, our body movements, coordination, and the muscles that are used for speaking. And the orbitofrontal cortex. And initially, those pathological anomalies seem to occur at higher level cognitive processing pathways and involve the cerebral cortex as well. And these neurochemical alterations play a major role in the disorders that are under this autism spectrum umbrella.
And I have Fragile X syndrome. Just a little background of the diagnosis. It's a genetically caused intellectual disability, and the abnormality is linked to the female X chromosome. And it's more common in men than women because women have another normal X chromosome to prevent the expression of the abnormal gene. And just some physical characteristics that go with it. They often have elongated faces, flat feet, prominent jaw and forehead, large protruding ears, high arched palate, and they also tend to have hyperextendable joints. And then, just for some of the etiology of it, the abnormality is caused by constriction of a portion of the X chromosome, and the constriction is caused by the FMR1 gene, and this gene affects body functions, primarily brain development. And individuals with a full mutation of the X chromosome will exhibit a shutdown of the FMR1 gene and a cessation of the production of FMRP. And the genetic mutations that lead to Fragile X syndrome lead to a wide array of characteristics. And just a little bit more information. Children with Fragile X will often be diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder because of their stereotypical behavior, poor eye contact, and unusual sensory stimuli responses. And then some of the symptoms are more severe in males, and they're often diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, and girls are often diagnosed with learning disabilities.
Okay, so my disorder is learning disability, and learning disability, just a little background, is a generic term used to define a conglomeration of disorders characterized by significant difficulties in the acquisition and use of listening, speaking, reading, writing, reasoning, or mathematic abilities. And these difficulties affect a child's ability to master school tasks, process information, and communicate effectively. And some of the signs and symptoms that learning disabilities present as is a disorder in motor function, educational function, attention and concentration, thinking and memory, speech and communication, auditory processing, sensory integration, and perceptual disorders, and then also psychosocial or specific learning disability like a reading or mathematic disability. So on the box we put these two pictures, and they're both of children that are they're really confused. They have a lot of different things going on in their brains because they're not able to process it as effectively as other children. And then like this child, the words on the picture are waste of time, dumb, and lazy, because that's kind of a stereotype of kids with learning disabilities, because they don't actually have any, they have sufficient or above average intelligence, sufficient sensory acuity, so they're kind of just categorized in stereotypes a lot more. And like I said, for the inside of the box, learning disabilities like Mal said are associated with like Fragile X, ADHD, and ASD disorders. So there's not a specific neurologic disorder that is associated with learning disabilities. They're most commonly associated with ADHD more than any other disabilities. And specific LDs manifest difficulty in auditory processing, language disabilities, and perceptual impairments. And these children are typically still provided with formal learning opportunities, but just exhibit a discrepancy between their academic potential and their educational performance.
And our theory was sensory integration, and sensory integration is the ability to make meaningful responses. And the theory was created by Jane Ayers, who recognized a common picture in some children with learning difficulties that related to difficulties in processing sensory information. So based on this research, she formulated hypotheses about deficits in neurobehavioral processes that are thought to be associated with learning disabilities. And sensory integration, some of the two main sensory systems that they focus on are the vestibular and the proprioceptive. So vestibular is responsible for our balance and movement, and the knowledge of the position of one's head. It is the knowledge of the position of one's head in relation to gravity and movement, which is used to come down a slide or ride a playground swing without falling off. And then proprioception, it involves the muscles and joint senses, and it is the internal awareness of the position of one's joints and muscles in space. And this allows you to lift a spoon to your mouth without spilling your soup.
So our treatment activity for the sensory integration theory is making Play-Doh. So we thought that in the clinic the child would be asked to help make Play-Doh with the therapist and manipulate Play-Doh to form various shapes and letters. And by making and manipulating the Play-Doh, the child would incorporate a variety of tactile inputs, proprioceptive input through heavy work, as well as fine motor strength and dexterity.
So to grade up our activity, you could have the child follow a picture story that would depict the steps in making the Play-Doh so that the child could do this independently rather than working with the therapist directly. You could also add more flour to make the Play-Doh tougher so that the child will receive more proprioceptive input, more heavy work, and then they would also help build their fine motor strength. And then in addition, you could have the child form more complex items such as full words, harder letters, and then whatever is appropriate. So we also talked about, making a human and like having the child identify the different body parts and things like that.
And to grade this activity down, you could have the Play-Doh pre-made before beginning the activity, or make the Play-Doh softer and easier to manipulate for the child. Or you could have the child make easier shapes such as circles, crosses, squares, etc., whatever's appropriate for this child.
And that's our therapy in a box.